meeting, you get a call from home that there's a crisis at home and you got to get there immediately, and in the middle of an exciting part of a championship game, your kids get into a squabble and you have to miss the best part of the game to break up the fight. Some interruptions are major and life-changing. Others are minor, over in just a few minutes. Some come from people, others come from circumstances. Some are expected, some anticipated, others not. People who are on call know all about interruptions. They have to take 2 cars to family outings and everywhere they go in case they get a call, and they have to race to work to handle a situation. If you're on call, you know what it is to constantly wonder, when is the next phone call coming and I don't get to do what I plan to do. You live under this constant threat of intrusion. If you're a stay-at-home mom, your life is just one interruption after another. The kids get hurt, an appliance breaks down, the baby is just about to fall asleep and a telemarketer calls and they're up for another hour. All day long you hear, "Mom, Mom," or a friend stops by and says, "I didn't have anything to do and I saw your car in the driveway and I thought I'd come in and hang out with you." Have you ever wondered, why is it that everybody who has nothing to do wants to do it with you? Proverbs 27:1 says, "You do not know what a day may bring forth." And that is so true. Interruptions are just a daily occurrence. How do we handle them? That has a lot to do with whether we're going to be a success or a failure, whether we're going to be happy or depressed, whether we're going to be a positive witness for Jesus or a negative influence for the Lord's church. Look at Matthew 14:13 and 14. This is perhaps the worst day of Jesus' life. He had just learned that John the Baptist had been beheaded. He's grief-stricken because John the Baptist is his cousin, and he's the one that was sent to announce his coming into the world. Verse 13 says, "When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place." Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So Jesus wants to be alone for a while. He's emotionally spent. He needs time to get away from the demands of the crowd. But that was not to be. The crowd interrupted this little getaway that Jesus planned. They saw where he was headed. They ran around the lake, and they were waiting for him to dock. And when he did, Jesus looked at this large crowd and had compassion on them. When I read that, I can't help thinking of the movie What About Bob? Remember the psychiatrist Leo Marvin, played by Richard Dreyfuss? He's really looking forward to a much-needed vacation with his family, and he goes to this place on the lake, and to his horror, Bob Wiley, a very needy patient, played by Bill Murray, shows up, and Bob has tracked Dr. Marvin down and traveled by bus for miles to see him, and Dr. Marvin is in town, and he hears Bob calling, "Dr. Marvin! Dr. Leo Marvin! Doctor! Doctor!" And Dr. Marvin recognizes Bob's voice and he tries to ignore him, but Bob will not be ignored. And his first question is this a bad time? And if you've seen that movie, you know that Dr. Marvin does everything he can to push Bob away. He nearly alienates his family because they like Bob and he's treating him so mean. Well, Jesus is looking forward to the privacy of the other side of the lake, but when he gets there, the place is crawling with needy people. I wonder if one of them said, "Is this a bad time? We need. And when Jesus saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Jesus had a way of turning interruptions into positive opportunities for ministry and healing. In fact, this is the occasion that resulted in Jesus feeding the 5,000 with a boy's small lunch. When you study the ministry of Jesus, you see that things like this just happened all the time. He turned interruptions into positive opportunities. Think of all the miracles recorded in the Scripture that were actually the result of an interruption. He was quietly enjoying a wedding reception, and his mother comes up and tells him they've run out of wine. You need to do something. And he tries to put her off. It's not my time has not yet come. But Mary ignores that, and she tells the servants, do whatever he tells you to do. And Jesus turns water into wine. After an exhausting day, Jesus and his disciples get in a boat. He laid down. He wanted to take a nap, but his disciples interrupt him. This storm is terrible. Don't you care that we're about to drown? Do something. And Jesus stood up. Peace, be still. And the water just stopped surging. Jesus miraculously calmed the storm. As Jesus and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus called out from the roadside, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the disciples try to quiet him down because they're in a hurry. But Jesus stops and he says, bring him to me. And that interruption resulted in a blind man getting his sight back. Once he was preaching at a house so jammed with people that nobody could get in, and the people on the outside were straining to hear everything he had to say, and 4 friends of a disabled man brought him on a mat, hoping that Jesus would heal him. When they couldn't get in the house, couldn't get anywhere near Jesus because of the dense crowd, they climbed up the outside stairway of the house onto the roof. They dug through the roof, and as Jesus was teaching inside, suddenly this mat comes down with the man on it, lowered right in front of them. Now that's what I call a distraction. But Jesus used the occasion to heal the man, to forgive his sins, to teach people about his deity. Another day, Jesus was teaching a large crowd of people when Jairus, a synagogue ruler, came running up to Jesus and he said, Jesus, please help me. My 12-year-old daughter is very sick. I'm afraid she will die. Could you come and heal her? And Jesus dropped what he was doing. He responded to the interruption by heading to the home of Jairus. The crowd was so big that it pressed against him. A woman in the crowd who had a blood issue for 12 years touched his cloak. She interrupted the interruption. And she's healed immediately. And Jesus stops and says, who touched my clothes? And this, who touched your clothes? I mean, look at this crowd. There's people touching your clothes all over the place. But Jesus knew the power had gone out of him, and he wanted to stop, and he wanted to talk to that woman. He took time to bless the woman before he went on. While he was speaking, he was interrupted again. It was messengers from the house of Jairus. They told Jairus, your daughter died, and you don't need to bother the master anymore. But Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. Jesus went into the house, past the wailers, the mourners. He went up to the little girl's room with her dad and mom and the disciples, and taking the girl by the hand, said, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately she got up and walked around. And people were astonished by his power. But if it weren't for interruptions, would Jesus have had an earthly ministry? Let me offer some suggestions that will help us turn some interruptions into positive opportunities that we can influence people the way Jesus did. First, plan some free time when you can rest. One of the reasons that we don't have time for interruptions in our lives is that we jam-pack our lives so full of activities that we don't have any additional time or energy for anything else. We need margin in our lives. Free time when we can be emotionally and spiritually rejuvenated. Jesus withdrew by boat to a private place, and on this day, he was not successful at getting away from the crowds, but we read in Matthew 14:23 that Jesus dismissed the crowds and went up on the mountainside to pray, and when evening came, he was all alone. Ever notice how Jesus intentionally went off by himself to be alone for a while with the Father? Mark 1:35, very early in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. John 6:15, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Luke 5:16, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. An old Indian proverb says, you will break the bow if you keep it always bent. If we never relax the tension in our life, we're going to have no flexibility to respond to interruptions. That's why from the very beginning, God set it up for us to work 6 days and take a day off. That's why God gave the Jewish people 6 feasts during the year. And on those feast days, they were to rest. 2 of those were a week long. Every 7th year, the Jewish people were not to plow their fields. God designed even the soil to need some time off. When our business is booming and the orders are going up and the money is coming in, we think, I can't get away now. I have to ride this wave. I have to maintain the momentum. This is moving so fast, I can't get off. And then we get exhausted physically, emotionally, and lose our passion, and we burn out. When interruptions come, we resent them because we're running on empty. We don't have anything to give. We would all do well to learn from Jesus and schedule a little time away. It recharges our batteries, our passion for what we're gifted to do. And sometimes we need to be unavailable for days. We can train somebody else to be in charge. We can allow them to do the job, and we don't need to be hovering over them. We don't need to be calling them or texting them all day long. Maybe you go somewhere where your cell phone won't even work, or put it somewhere where you can't get to it so you can check it. We need to spend time relaxing, praying, doing a slow trickle charge. And then when an interruption comes along, we'll probably have the energy to respond properly. Sometimes we need a quick charge, just a few minutes during the day. If you have an office, shut the door. Let the phone go to voicemail. Shouldn't feel obligated to have an open door policy all the time. That allows others to just manage your time on their terms, not yours. Now, an open door policy is good, but it means I am open for honest communication on my schedule. Doesn't mean that you have to be available for instant communication with everybody all the time. We all need some time alone when we can totally focus on our work. Jesus wasn't always available. He went to those solitary places alone to pray. Now, I know if you're a stay-at-home mom, you're laughing inwardly right now. But why don't you get a babysitter for a few hours once in a while? Or schedule a nap when the kids are taking a nap. One mother just had her 3rd child and sent a thank you note to a friend. Thank you for the playpen. I'm using it every day from 2 to 3 p.m. I get in it, read, and the kids can't get near me. Creative ways to find freedom from interruptions. Second thing we can learn from Jesus is determine the nature of the interruption. On occasion, we read about Jesus in Matthew 14 responding to an interruption, but we need to realize that Jesus didn't quickly respond to every interruption. One day Jesus got word from Mary and Martha that Lazarus was sick, and please come right now. John 11:6. When he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And by the time he got to the house of Lazarus, he had been dead 4 days, and the sisters were ticked off that Jesus had not responded quickly to their request. But Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. He raised Lazarus from the dead, and God got the glory. Mark 1:35 through 38 is interesting. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everybody's looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That's why I have come." Not all interruptions are God's call. Not all interruptions can be used in a positive way. Some are from the adversary, and they just need to be ignored. Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem, and he was interrupted by some critics who wanted him to stop the work and come to a zoning committee meeting. And he said, "I'm not doing that. I'm not coming down. I'm doing a great work." Andy Stanley wrote a book called Choosing to Cheat. His premise is that we can't say yes to everything and everyone, so don't cheat the people and the things that are most important to you. We have to be able to tell if an interruption is an opportunity to serve God or if it's an attack by the adversary to sidetrack us from our primary calling. And that's not always easy to determine and takes prayer and wisdom. Something's contrary to God's will, we have to be perceptive about its source. A coworker says out of the blue, let's take the afternoon off and go golfing. Well, sometimes that might be just the right thing to do. But generally, we need to keep our hand to the plow. Somebody at work starts gossiping, or a fun, frivolous email pops up that you want to share with others. We need to resist that kind of interruption. Or you have several people waiting for you at a meeting, and it's in 5 minutes, and you're on the way to the meeting, and somebody catches you in the hall, and they just have this big issue, and you really need to say, this is going to require more time than I can give you right now. Let me call you about this later. Because it is disrespectful to several people who have scheduled a meeting with you to make them wait while you answer a question of somebody who didn't have the courtesy to make an appointment. On the other hand, there are some interruptions that provide opportunities for greater benefits than the task at hand. We need to respond to those. As a grandfather, I find myself doing things for my grandkids that I wouldn't have thought of doing for my kids, unfortunately. If one of my boys had asked me to do some of the things that my grandchildren asked me to do, I'd have said, I think you can handle this without me. But now I realize how little time I have with those kids, and I realize what the priorities ought to be, and I put aside what I'm doing and do whatever it is they ask me to do. And it deepens relationships, and I find I can usually come back to whatever it was I was doing and take right up where I left off. In Ephesians 5:15 through 17, it says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." So be discerning and determine the nature of the interruption. Third principle we need to learn from Jesus is be totally focused where you are. Now, this is getting harder and harder the more we have these tablets and smartphones and texts and all that stuff. I mean, we can just be interrupted anytime, anywhere we go. And it's very easy to be talking to somebody face to face and yet have our mind be in a totally different place, thanks to technology. One of the things that is impressive about Jesus is how he focused his attention on where he was at the time. Think of the pressure as he hurried to the home of Jairus. I mean, this is a very powerful man. And then this unknown woman who has been a social outcast for 12 years touches the hem of his garment, and he stops to give attention to her. The disciples are tugging at him. Let's keep going here. No, there is someone here who needs me. She just got healed, and she needs to understand this is not magic. She needs to understand that the reason for her healing was faith. He shut everything else out for a few minutes, and he just ministered to her. When we're interrupted, we usually give partial attention. We nervously glance at our watch, or we pretend to be listening, and we really are thinking about what we're going to do next. Or we look right through the person, and our mind is somewhere else entirely, wondering, how am I going to make up for this lost time? Or we talk on the phone while working on the computer. Recent studies are showing that multitasking is overrated. Multitasking reduces effectiveness. We are not much good to anybody when our mind is in one place and we are in another. Bob Russell used to be the preacher at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, tells the best story I know about this. When he was a student preacher at a little country church, he finished preaching one Sunday morning, and he was standing at the door shaking the hands of the people as they left, and the little old lady wanted to talk, and she talked and talked and talked. And the people behind her were getting restless. They started to go around them, and some would tap them on the shoulder as they went by. And there were some first-time guests there, so he just kind of cut her off and started talking to them and welcomed them and invited them back. And she grabbed him by the tie, and she pulled him right into her face, and she said, "Young man, look at me when I talk." And I'm sure glad it's no tie thing. I mean, there are some advantages to that. But he realized, he said, that he was not giving her full attention, and he said from that day on, every time I talked to somebody, I always looked at them and I always focused on them, and I try to remember that lest I get pulled around. Jim Elliot said, "Wherever you are, be all there." And we get the impression that Jesus was 100% there when he was with anybody. And we need to work at being like that in this age of digital distractions. Fourth, take advantage of positive opportunities. We need to try to see interruptions as opportunities immediately. Now, sometimes in hindsight, what seems like an interruption at the time turns out to be a far greater opportunity than what we thought we were passing up. If you're a driven person intent on packing as much into each day as possible, you'll be inclined to immediately resent any interruption as an intrusion. But it just may be that the interruption is the gateway to a greater opportunity for God to use you. Colossians 3:23 and 4, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." Realize that your job is not the mundane tasks you are performing. It's just a way to provide for the family. Your job is to serve Jesus himself. When you see your job as an assignment from God, you realize that unexpected interruptions could be divine appointments. God's in charge of your time, not you. Maybe he has something more important for you to do. Could that phone call that seems to have come at just the worst possible time actually be a golden opportunity that you have been praying for? Maybe that traffic jam that you resent is really an opportunity to listen to Christian music and worship God right in the middle of your day, right in the middle of the freeway. Maybe that copier breakdown really is God's way of developing patience in you and helping you to grow in self-control. Maybe those often heard words, "Hey, Mom," turn out to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a memory or to make an impression on your child. So instead of resenting intrusions, at least think about the possibility this may be God tapping you on the shoulder. We must begin to see interruptions as opportunities if we're going to get opportunities to share our faith. We have to be more like our perfect example, Jesus. When Jesus heard what happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed, they said, "Is this a bad time?" But he didn't try to avoid them. Matthew says he saw a large crowd and had compassion on them and healed their sick. Christ offers an invitation to anyone who came today seeking. Maybe there's somebody who came planning to make this the day that I'm going to confess my faith in Christ. I am going to be a Christ follower from this day forward. You understand that salvation is for eternity. It's not dependent on any works that you do. Because we've all sinned, it's available to all of us through the grace of God. It's dependent on trusting in the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus and responding to that in obedience. Perhaps you plan today to make Jesus Lord of your life and be baptized. Or maybe you plan today to make this the place that you are going to worship and serve the Lord. Don't let anything deter you from that decision. But maybe you hadn't even planned on coming today. Maybe you had other things planned for this day, but some family member or some friend just harped on you so bad that you had to come today. And now you feel God's tapping you on the shoulder and saying, it's about time you made a decision for Christ. For you, this interruption by God could be destiny changing. It could completely change your eternal abode from hell to heaven. Please respond to that interruption. You will be forever grateful that you did. Let's stand and sing.
Grace, what have you done? Murdered for me on that cross, accused in absence of wrong, my sin washed away in your blood. Too much to make sense of it all. I know that your love breaks my fall. The scandal of grace